you a fan of the show? You came in late in the series, you came into the reboot.
Right.
Were you a fan of the show when it was originally on TV?
I was a fan of the show. I think I was really young when it came out in like 1992 or 1993, but I remember specifically, I think watching like reruns of season like 6 or something, airing around the time that like Friends was on when I would get home from high school. So I definitely started watching way later, like seasons 5, season 6. And at that time, I didn't have the DVDs or anything or the VHSs, and there wasn't streaming yet. So I was just catching them when they were on TV. Like anytime they were on TV, I would catch them on, and then I would go back to school and discuss with my friends to see if they'd seen those episodes. And I thought it was a terrifying show, but yeah, I remember how big it was, and I remember I hadn't seen that many episodes. I maybe saw like 10 episodes. But once I started, and I'm skipping ahead here a little bit, but once I started working for Chris Carter in 2013, at the end of 2013, I went back and rewatched like every single episode. So I became a fan of the X-Files before the reboots were shot.
You had started working with Chris Carter in 2013 for his Amazon show. What was it like working with him on the X-Files? What was it like writing for a show that had already had so much history?
Yeah, that was, so when we did the first five episode reboot in 2015, 2016, I think it was, I was the writer's assistant, which was just wild because they got all the big writers from the show back together, and I was meeting everybody, and I wasn't writing at that time for the show, but I got to watch and observe everybody, which was just fantastic. And then during the next series in 2017, 2018, Chris gave me an episode, and that just like blew my mind. And like going back to remembering when I was like in high school watching the X-Files on TV, like in the early 2000s, I just, to think that I would be writing an episode like, 15 years later was like blew my mind. But yeah, it was really crazy. I mostly just like watched, listened, and observed, because here I was writing my very first TV episode ever, and it's an X-Files episode, and I'm in the same room with like Darren Morgan and Jim Wong and Glenn Morgan and Chris Carter, and I'm just like, all these greats who've been writing for like longer than I've been alive, it feels like, so I just took as much advice from them as possible and kind of let them lead me. And I think the episode turned out great. I really enjoyed it, but yeah, it was mostly just learning from the greats.
How much did you have to do with those creepy Teletubby things?
A lot, actually. So
those are terrifying, by the way.
The way TV works, a lot of people don't know this because they see one writer's name on a TV episode and they think they wrote the entire thing, which in the X-Files actually is normally the case. Most television shows, the way they run is all the writers are in a writing room together, and they all pitch on the story and they all write the story. And basically the whole story is like almost completely written structured by a bunch of writers, and then they assign one writer to go off and actually put pen to paper, but the whole episode's basically been written already. The X-Files is different, where the X-Files, each writer is assigned an episode and you go off and write it by yourself, like, and then you come back and pitch it to the room of writers. Then they help you like fix things and stuff. So there's always different things that change. And there's a lot of suggestions and ideas from Chris and Glenn and all the writers on the X-Files in the episode that I wrote. But I will take credit for the Teletubbies. That was in my outline from the very beginning. Those creepy Teletubbies always creep me out, so I definitely wanted to put them in there. So yeah, that was one thing that made it through. That was an original idea that I had, was those creepy Teletubbies.
What about Mr. Chuckleteeth?
Mr. Chuckleteeth. So I think when I very, very early stages was outlining this episode, the monster of the episode was like a witch, just like a regular witch in the woods. But right. We slowly, like going through the story, decided that's been done too many times. We wanted something a little more unique. And the kid getting killed at the very beginning was always in there. So I'm trying to remember exactly how it happened, but me and Gabe Rotter were having a conversation, and somehow it came up that it would be really cool if it was some like creepy like TV show character. You know, I definitely wanted to write this episode with a recognizable monster in mind, because there's so many recognizable monsters in the original X-Files. And when I was looking through all the reboot episodes, there wasn't a lot of like, oh, that's the one recognizable like monster that's like can go down in like X-Files canon history. You know what I mean?
Right.
So I really wanted, like, my main goal for the episode was to get a specific X-Files monster that people could recognize at first sight. So, and it's been a little while, so I don't remember exactly how he came about, but I do remember going on YouTube and searching like every creepy kid show character ever created. And one that popped up was Mr. Nosybonk from an old UK kids TV show called Jigsaw. And he's really, if you look up Mr. Nosybonk on Google, he kind of looks like Mr. Chuckleteeth. He's really creepy looking.
Nightmares.
The guy that did the actual design for the show sent this to me.
From my experience working with writers when I worked in LA, did you get very involved on the set for the episode? Were you up in Vancouver? Were you involved in the post process at all?
Yeah. So one thing Chris Carter has always done since the very beginning, it's really up to the showrunner how involved the writers are in their episodes. Some showrunners, like, I'll call out Damon Lindelof real quick. I love his shows. I think he's a genius, brilliant writer. But one thing I've heard just through the grapevine is that Lindelof doesn't let any of his writers go to set. Like, he wants all of his writers in the writer's room creating the story, and he leaves all the production to the crew, basically. Chris is the complete opposite, and I have heard he's been this way forever. He really wants the writer to be in charge of their episode, and he wants every writer to produce their episode. So if it's your episode, you're in you're in pre-production, you're in prep, you go to shoot in Vancouver, you're there every single day on set, and then when it's in post, you're in post-production cutting with the editor. So that's what I was doing. And I was a staff writer, so I wasn't. Staff writer is like the lowest tier hierarchy in the writer's room, and you're not a producer as a staff writer. But Chris didn't care that I wasn't a producer. He sent me, like, I was on set every single day with the director, like producing my episode, even though I didn't have an official producer title on the show. And he just had me there every step of the way, kind of like helping me like see my vision through to the end, basically, which is a really cool thing that he does. And it really trains writers to become producers, which ultimately, if you stay writing in television, you have to become a producer eventually.
What was your experience learning from him as a writer?
So much, because it wasn't just on the show. I worked for him for almost like 7 years, I think. So, I worked with him I was the writer's assistant on the After for Amazon. And even though that show never got made, that was my first time in a writer's room, because we wrote 8 episodes for that show. So like they did the pilot before, or they wrote the pilot before I worked for him, and I met him on set. I was a production assistant when they shot the pilot. So I met him, and I met the producer, Gabe Rotter, and I met them on production of the After, and then they hired me on right after as their full-time assistant. And we went right into production, and then went right into a writer's room in the new year and wrote 8 episodes that summer. So I learned a lot on the After, but unfortunately no one's ever going to get to see those episodes. But it was really cool. He let me, he's really inclusive. He let me pitch ideas as a writer's assistant, like on that show. And I got like a bunch of ideas on the board for the After. But I'm trying to remember some specific things that I did learn from him. There's so many, I'd have to put them all together. But a couple things that I think really helped for my episode, and specifically, one thing he always says is like, don't show too much, which I think is really important for a show like the X-Files, especially when they shot the X-Files, when we didn't have a lot of CGI and stuff. This also happened like with the movie Jaws and stuff. The less you see the shark, the better, because the shark looks really goofy, so the less you see of the shark, the scarier it is. And that actually, rather than a practical philosophy, I would say, so things don't look goofy, really the less you see the monster, the more scared you are. The more you start seeing it, the more just becomes goofier. You're not as scared. So in X-Files, I tried to kind of keep, especially in some of those woods scenes, I tried to kind of keep the monster like behind trees, you know, where you're just barely seeing the side of his face or something. And he's like moving between all the trees to make him really scary. Whereas if you just saw him all the time, he'd be less scary, you know? So like definitely showing less makes it more scary. There's a bunch of other things I learned. A lot of what I learned was like just practical stuff about how to act in a writer's room and how to, you know, behave as a writer. And he read so many of my scripts. There's so many little tidbits he showed me. It just kind of all gets ingrained in you. I don't have any like exact quotes from him right now, but.
What was your favorite experience being on the show?
You know, it's really cool. There's a lot of them, you know, just being in the writer's room with those great writers it was a great experience for me. But also being on set. I've been on many sets before, because even before I worked for Chris Carter, I was a PA. So I've worked on movies, commercials, TV shows, photo shoots. Like I've been on so many sets before, but I've never been on a set where hundreds of people were working towards my vision and like my script, which was like absolutely crazy, especially being in like the pre-production phases. You know, we have meetings every single day with all the department heads on this big long table, and we're going through the script page by page and discussing like how we want to shoot this thing. And then you take meetings throughout the day. Like I'll go over to the prop room, and the prop masters will have like the Mr. Chuckleteeth dolls they're building and everything. And I'm just like, this is just the craziest thing. I can like, to have millions of dollars and hundreds of people working on something you wrote is just, I can't even explain how awesome that is. Just to see the words, because I've written, before that X-Files script, I don't know, I've probably written like 5 features and 20 television show pilots. You know, it's kind of the process of trying to become a writer. You just write. And so I think I got into this rut where I was just writing things to get noticed without ever thinking they would get made. So that like completely left my mind that these actually become TV shows or these scripts actually become movies. So like when they started, my script started becoming an actual television show and props were being made and actors were being cast, it was a very surreal moment. Like that's something hopefully I'll get to see again someday, but that was amazing.
This is the question that we ask everyone that we have caught up with from the cast and crew.
Yeah.
So we're wondering, why do you think the X-Files is still relevant 25 plus years later? And, you know, what's your personal message to the fans?
I think it's relevant just because it's a great show, but it's so nostalgic for people. It was so big in the 90s that like, I think people just want to see more forever. Like as long as they make them, people are going to want to see as much as possible. And the characters are so dear to people's hearts. I especially like today, this is something that came up a lot, and I don't know if this is good for the X-Files or bad for the X-Files. So this may not be answering your question at all, but there's so many conspiracies today. Like nobody believes anything. Nobody believes the government. Nobody believes what they read online. Everything's fake news, you know? So I don't know if that hurts or helps the X-Files, but I feel like conspiracies today are bigger than they've ever been. But I wonder if, because there was less media and less conspiracies in the 90s, watching big conspiracies like X-Files on TV was like, wow, it was so amazing to see these crazy government conspiracies and aliens and stuff. But nowadays, like there's so much going on in the news. They've been reporting like alien sightings on the news and nobody cares. Like nobody's even like paying attention to it. So I don't know if that helps the X-Files or hurts the X-Files, but conspiracies are still very much alive in today's society. So I think there is a place for an X-Files show today still. And what was the second part of your question? I'm sorry.
What would if we've asked everybody, if you could say something to the fans for over the last 27 years, what would it be?
Thank you for letting me into your little world. That's been a real treat. It's been you asked what one of the coolest things was working on the X-Files. This one was actually really, really cool. Was And, not everybody likes every single episode. That's another great thing about the X-Files. Some people love the standalone episodes. Some people love the conspiracy episodes. Everyone has their own. You could ask a million X-Files fans what their favorite episodes are, and you'll get a whole different lists from everybody. But one of the really cool things was coming into the X-Files as a brand new writer, working with all these great writers, and then seeing a lot of positive how hardcore X-Files fans are, like seeing a lot of positive reactions to my episode from the old school X-Files fans. That made me feel so good to have the old school fans who love the original series pouring like support and love for my episode out on the internet. That felt so good, because that's what I was trying to do with the episode, was make an old school looking episode, an episode that maybe you could have seen in the 90s. That's what I wanted to do with my episode. So I just want to say thank you to all the fans who liked my episode. And even if you didn't, thank you for watching the show. We couldn't do it without you guys.